Arno Victor Dorian was born in 1768 to Charles Dorian and his wife Marie. Arno was raised by his father alone in Versailles after his mother would leave them when she discovered Charles's allegiance to the Assassin Brotherhood. At the age of 8, Arno became an orphan after his father was murdered by the Irish-American Templar Shay Patrick Cormac. Francis de la Serre, Grand Master of the French Rite of the Templar Order, then took Arno in as his ward and raised him alongside his daughter Elise. Over the years, Arno and Elise would become close friends and later lovers. In May of 1789, Francis de la Serre was murdered at the Palace of Versailles as part of a coup within the French Templar Rite, and Arno would be framed for the murder. While imprisoned at the Bastille, he would meet master assassin Pierre Belec, who told Arno of his assassin heritage, and racked with guilt over his past failures, Arno would join the Assassin Brotherhood in hopes of avenging both his biological and adoptive fathers, while also working to uncover the true instigators of the revolution. Throughout his journey, Arno gained various allies, including, oh god, I am not French enough to pronounce any of these, Anton Lavoisier, Marquis de Sade, George Danton, Napoleon Bonaparte, and Elise, who had recently been inducted into the Templar Order, also seeking revenge against her father's murderers. Arno and Elise soon discovered that a Templar named Germain had orchestrated de la Serre's death in hopes of reforming the Templar Order and instigating a revolution to his end. When the assassin mentor Mirabeau accepted an alliance with her on the behalf of the Brotherhood, Belec would poison him and would try to kill Elise as well, forcing Arno to assassinate his former teacher. After killing most of Germain's subordinates, Arno would be exiled from the Assassin Brotherhood and would be shunned by Elise, causing him to retreat back to the now abandoned and dilapidated de la Serre estate in Versailles. 6 months later, Elise would find Arno in a drunken, depressed state at the Palais and would apologize to him before they both returned to Paris. After eliminating the remainder of Germain's allies, they would track him down at the temple in July of 1794, where a final confrontation ensued and Germain would kill Elise using the Sword of Eden, and Arno, grief-stricken, would kill him in return. Heartbroken over Elise's death, Arno sank deeper into alcoholism and depression once more and ultimately resolved to leave Paris altogether. After this, Arno would decide to remain in France and rejoin the Assassin Brotherhood, eventually rising to the rank of Master Assassin. Ezio Auditore da Firenze was a Florentine nobleman born in the Renaissance, born in 1459, and unbeknownst to most historians and philosophers, a master assassin, and the mentor of the Italian Brotherhood of Assassins, a title which he held from 1503 to 1513. A member of House of Auditore, Ezio remained unaware of his assassin heritage until the age of 17, when he witnessed the hanging of his father and two brothers, Federico and Petruccio? I think that says Petruccio. Forced to flee his birthplace with his remaining family members, his mother and sister, Ezio would take refuge with his uncle in the Tuscan town of Montenricchio. Look, I'm not Italian, I don't know how to pronounce these, I'm sorry. At the Villa Auditore. After learning of his heritage from Mario, Ezio began his assassin training and set about on his quest for vengeance against the Templar Order and their Grand Master, the Spaniard Rodrigo Borgia, who had ordered the execution of his father and brothers. During his travels, Ezio managed to not only unite the pages of the Codex written by Altair, mentor of the Levantine Brotherhood of Assassins, but also save the cities of Florentine, Venice, and Rome from Templar rule. He ensured the future travels of Christopher Columbus to the New World, liberated Rome from Borgia rule, and prevented the rise of power of, oh god, more names I can't pronounce, of the cult of Hermes, helping spread the Renaissance and the assassin ideals of independence and free will throughout Italy. In the years that followed, Ezio began a quest to rediscover the lost history of the Order, traveling to the aged fortresses of Masyaf in order to learn more of the assassins before him. He discovered it overrun with Templars and made his way to the city of Constantinople to uncover the location of the massive keys, which, as he discovered, would unlock the fortress's fabled hidden library when brought together. A decade later, Ezio had retired and resigned in a Tuscan villa with his wife, Sophia Sator, and his two children, Flaviva and Marcello. Sometime after helping teach the Chinese assassin Xiao Jun the ways of the Order, Ezio would die of a heart attack at age 65, though his legacy would live for centuries after his death. Hello and welcome everyone to yet another episode of my Versus series where I will be pitting two master assassins against each other, with the French assassin Arno Dorian from the mixed but still decent Assassin's Creed Unity, and the legendary Ezio Auditore, specifically from his appearance in Brotherhood, in a bit of a symbolic matchup for me. as Arno's game was the last Assassin's Creed game I ever finished, and Ezio's games are the ones that got me into the series in the first place. Now, once again, I don't really feel the need to look into these characters' physicality. Both would be in great shape and are capable of taking on opponents physically superior to themselves, as well as groups, and having the agility to effortlessly traverse and climb up to rooftops in seconds, as well as taking an above average amount of damage and continuing to fight, and both having pretty similar physical builds. The biggest difference here would actually be their ages, with Arno being 25 by the end of Assassin's Creed Unity in 1794, just having entered into his physical prime a few years before, and Ezio being 48 at the end of Assassin's Creed Brotherhood in 1507, being about a decade past his physical prime. So if you really pushed me, I'd say that Arno would have a very slight advantage, but I honestly can't see it being the deciding factor here. Right, with all that out of the way, let's once again get into this by examining their weapons and equipment. As a French assassin, Arno had a decent arsenal of weapons, armor, as well as various other tools to aid him on missions. Now, due to the nature of Assassin's Creed Unity, Arno can wield up to 5 different primary weapons. So in order to keep things simple, I'll be giving him a total of 3 primary weapons, along with his handgun, his customized hidden blade, and his smoke bombs. As a master assassin after the death of Elise, Arno would go on to wield the depowered Sword of Eden as his primary weapon. This sword was a bastard sword about 3 feet in length from the butt of the handle to the tip of the blade. As a bastard sword, this weapon was capable of being used both as a slashing and piercing weapon. However, the straight blade and pointed tip making it a bit more effective at thrusting strikes. His second weapon was a halberd, a 2-handed pole with a spiked axe head attached to a 5-foot pole. The length of the weapon making it easier to defend with, and it was very effective at keeping opponents at a distance. As a 2-handed weapon, more force can be put into the power blows, but the length requiring a wider swing. And finally, he had his own guillotine gun known as the Eagle. The guillotine gun was, simply put, a grenade launcher with an axe head attached to the barrel. This weapon, while used in melee combat, functioned similarly to a heavy axe, though as it needs to function as a grenade launcher as well, it is shorter. Typically used as a chopping weapon, though Arno also shoots grenades which can clear entire groups in a single shot. Much like every other assassin of the Brotherhood, Arno carried a hidden blade, a small 6-inch blade inside of a wrist gauntlet. However, unlike many assassins before him, Arno didn't use it in combat, instead seemingly using it primarily as a stealth weapon or to finish off wounded opponents. However, Arno did regularly use his phantom blade, a drawstring attachment to his hidden blade allowing him to fire the blade itself. As a silent, ranged weapon, it allowed Arno to take opponents out from a distance without alerting anyone to his position, functioning similarly to a crossbow, as well as the optional berserk blade, which is coated in a toxin that will cause someone shot with the weapon to attack anyone nearby, going apeshit. His pistol was modeled like a dueling pistol, but it was customized to be capable of firing 6 shots before needing to reload it. As a master assassin, Arno wore a set of noble-looking robes equipped with lightweight leather armor, giving him, honestly, very limited protection in favor of not hampering his agility. However, in fairness, light armor is still much more preferable to no armor. As a master assassin, Ezio carried a variety of weapons into combat, including 1 small weapon, 1 medium weapon, 1 heavy weapon, his custom hidden blades, throwing knives, a crossbow, and smoke bombs. Starting with his most iconic weapon, Ezio's hidden blades are probably the most custom and versatile in the series, wielding 2 6-inch blades as opposed to having the typical 1, which he used in combat with surprising ease and effectiveness. These also came equipped with a number of secondary functions, allowing Ezio to stealthily poison his enemies with a secondary blade, as well as take enemies out from a distance with a prototype pistol that, while taking a few seconds to line up, still functions as intended. Ezio's small weapon was a dagger known as the Notch Cicada. This dagger is roughly just over a foot in total length, with a sharp pointed tip and wide blade making it an excellent stabbing weapon. His medium and primary weapon was the Sword of Altair, a sword about 31 inches from one end to the other, the straight double-edged blade making it effective both as a stabbing and slashing weapon, though the design would lend itself more towards stabbing. His heavy weapon is known as the Spadone, a great sword about 4 feet in length, and due to the size of this weapon, it took a good amount of strength to wield and was very difficult to use quickly. However, this was balanced with power blows being easier and more effective thanks to the weight. He carried a set of 10 throwing knives, which were effective at taking out unarmored and lightly armored foes from short to medium distances. His crossbow could fire bolts from even further distances and had more firepower, allowing him to pierce thicker armors. He also used a metal-plated glove called a cestus on his sword-wielding hand, which, if unarmed, could allow him to punch much harder and if armed, would protect his hand from any disarming strikes. Ezio's robes were a lightweight armor set, allowing Ezio to run and fight unhampered by heavy armor while still keeping some protection. Both combatants are bringing an impressive arsenal into battle with them. However, that being said, this was still a fairly simple comparison. Ezio is certainly bringing more to the table with his number of secondary weapons. However, if you break it down, Arno's weapons actually give him more variety in how he can fight, allowing him to fight using a sword, polearm, or an axe-like weapon, while all of Ezio's primary weapons are straight, double-edged blades just with varying lengths and weights. Their swords are designed to function in the exact same way, both being capable of slashing but more specialized for thrusting, with Arno's sword just being bigger, both longer and wider, giving him the ever so slight advantage in swordplay. Arno's halberd is the longest weapon either of these two will be wielding, giving him the overall length advantage in close combat, as well as its length giving him more area to defend it against attacks with. However, this defense would be limited, and I have no doubt that enough hard hits from the spadone would break right through the wooden pole. Speaking of the spadone, overall it's the hardest hitting melee weapon in either's arsenal, with the closest thing in Arno's arsenal being the guillotine gun. However, the design of this weapon needing to function as both a firearm and melee weapon doesn't lend itself as well to melee combat as the spadone, which was specifically made for melee engagements. I honestly don't feel that the notched Sinkeda will play much of a role in this fight. All of Arno's weapons are longer, which would easily allow him to keep Ezio at bay while using the dagger. Now, if Ezio used his dagger and sword in tandem like Connor Kenway or Shay Cormac, he would be much more effective and would certainly have enough options to get around Arno's Blade of Eden and guillotine gun. However, as he is seen using it in-game, it would be painfully ineffective. Now, I'll be going over their skill with this weapon in more detail in the next category, but in terms of overall effectiveness, Ezio's hidden blade is much easier for close quarters fighting, having a blade on each wrist instead of Arno's single blade, on top of functions like the poison blade, which Arno wouldn't be familiar with. However, even then, I believe using the hidden blades at all would only be a last resort for either fighter, so this is a pretty small advantage. In terms of ranged combat, Arno is all but uncontested in this area. While yes, Ezio does have several options for ranged combat, none of them are as accurate, none of them can be used at the same rate as Arno's pistol, and none pack as much firepower as the guillotine gun. Now, if we took guns entirely out of the equation, Arno's crossbow would be the most effective weapon, and his throwing knives would be more than a match for the Phantom Blade. However, when taking everything into account, Arno's firearms are superior. Their armors are functionally identical, both offering some protection while not limiting their movements, and both fighters also happen to be wielding weapons that would allow them to pierce through such a lightweight armor set. I suppose if you really pushed me, I would give the very slight advantage for armor to Ezio for his metal armored cestus, which would protect his right hand, making it just a bit harder to disarm him if Arno went for a disarming cut to the hand. And as specific as an advantage as this is, it is still one he'd have over Arno, so I have to give it to him. Ezio's armor doesn't leave him completely outmatched by Arno, having the slight armor advantage, superior hidden blades, and the hardest hitting weapon, but Arno is bringing a wider variety of weapons, has more length as well as weapons better geared towards defense, and completely dominates ranged combat, overall giving him the edge in weapons and equipment. Like in all of my matchups involving combatants using melee weapons, I will be using Star Wars lightsaber fighting forms to better and more easily describe how both of these opponents approach combat with their particular styles. Now, with that out of the way, let's begin. Growing up as a French nobleman, Arno was taught the basics of fencing at an early age by Templar Grand Master Francis de la Serre, seeing as even before joining the Assassin Order, he was a skilled swordsman, only having his skills honed during his training with Pierre Bellecq in the Bastille and years as an assassin. Arno's main fighting style with his Blade of Eden was Form 2 Makashi, with elements of the Form 5 variation Gemso, mainly using Form 2 and selectively implementing Form 5 for its use of power-based attacks as well as some defensive maneuvers. Much like fencing, Form 2 was a fighting style designed purely to be used against other sword-wielding opponents, maneuvering maneuvers like feints, sword binds, and parries to manipulate his blade in order to slip past opening in his opponent's guard with a precise and often fatal strike. Users of Makashi were also taught to use footwork and stamina management to avoid overexerting themselves. The form had two main weaknesses. The first was its inability to implement true power attacks, which would directly lead to Arno to utilizing Form 5 style heavy blows, and had a higher difficulty when defending against projectile-based attacks. which I doubt Arno ever had the chance to work on. Using the halberd and guillotine gun, Arno mainly fought using Form 5. However, unlike with the sword, with these weapons, the power-oriented heavy blows of the form were his main method of attack, and not just used to break his opponent's guard. Gemso was primarily a mixture of defensive maneuvers designed to open up an opponent's guard, and then countering, as well as power blows designed to smash through someone's guard. Experience-wise, Arno is almost an exact mirror of Shay Cormac, only in reversed, being raised up and taught by a Templar, eventually using the skills taught to him by Delacerre as an assassin, making him even more effective at combating Templars, as it's very likely that he was being groomed to eventually become a Templar just like Elise, and as such, would recognize their techniques and tactics as one his own teacher and adoptive father Delacerre used. Tactically, Arno was very much a product of his time, with the French branch of the Order in his era lacking major power, resulting in Arno being taught to rely on stealth to silently eliminate targets and get out undetected, with direct confrontations being more common than most eras due to the widespread violence of the French Revolution, but still being a last resort. Over his 20 years as an assassin by the events of Brotherhood, Ezio would go from a young nobleman simply out for revenge to one of the greatest assassins of his time, and possibly the Order's entire history. Trained by his uncle Mario, Ezio was taught to act as a standard assassin of his time period, relying on stealth over combat due to the Templars holding more power in the time period and area, however being more than ready to hold his own if it came down to it. Ezio would use two primary styles in combat, the first and most common being a defense and power-based fighting style, often waiting for his opponents to strike before countering with a fatal blow, before moving on to another opponent, and a secondary style designed to slip through an opponent's guard with his blade work as opposed to brute force. His main fighting style was the Form 5 variation Gemso, a style primarily developed for blade-on-blade combat utilizing a combination of blocks and parries. A Gemso user maintained proper foundation and defense against both ranged and melee attacks. Immediately after defending against an opponent's strike, a Gemso stylist followed with an attack of their own, bringing the force of the opponent's own blow against them and seeking to dominate the duel. Gemso placed a heavy focus on brute strength and pure power, with wide, powerful strikes and parries followed immediately by a counterattack. The second was Form 2 Makashi, developed for the purpose of lightsaber to lightsaber combat. To address the failings of Form 1, Makashi was the most dueling-centric style of the 7 classical forms, relying on precision and efficiency. Makashi was designed as elegant and focused, and was based on balance and footwork to outmaneuver opponents. Fluidity, precision, and economy of motion were relied on, rather than strength, with Form 2 blade work heavily utilizing jabs and light cuts rather than hacking and slashing movements. However, the form was at its best when engaged in combat against a single enemy duelist. Like in most matches with fighters who can use the same combat style, this was a fairly simple comparison, as we just need to look at who uses their style more effectively, who has more experience, and who would be more prepared to face the other. And in most of those departments, I'm confident in saying that Arno has the advantage. First of all, out of both of them, Arno is the only one to not only fight, but defeat another master level assassin in direct combat, one who used many of Ezio's own techniques. The sword dueling verdict is a no-brainer. Arno not only has the advantage in nearly 300 years of combative innovation, but was trained by both a master assassin and Balek, and was personally trained by the French Templar Grandmaster, eventually surpassing both of his teachers. It also helps that Arno is far more active with fencing being his primary attack style, and using the teachings of Gemso to make up for Makashi's weaknesses, allowing him to use his weapons both for precision and power as needed, while not sitting back and relying on defense. With the uses of Gemso, Ezio is far too reactionary with his style, mainly being used to use his own opponent's attacks against them. And while this can be an excellent way to dispatch a lesser skilled opponent who wouldn't be expecting it, but when going up against someone of a similar skill level who was taught to use these same styles and would be careful not to leave themselves open for your counter, you're in for a much harder fight. Not to mention that by waiting for Arno to attack, he's all but gift wrapping Arno control of the fight. To once again steal a line right from 3 Topics Gamer, one must always be acting, never reacting. Ezio, thanks to his chosen style, simply isn't prepared to face Arno, who lived in a time period where mobs of people were very common, meaning that Arno couldn't sit and wait for his opponent to act first or he'd be swarmed. And Arno has already proven that he can take down someone fighting with Ezio's mindset. And once Ezio does realize he needs to go on the offensive against Arno, he's going to have a much harder time keeping up with Arno's more naturally aggressive fighting style. Or even worse, Arno could simply hold Ezio back long enough to get out either his flintlock pistol or his guillotine gun's grenade launcher. Just to give some credit to Ezio, I will say that Ezio is easily better equipped to use his hidden blades in close quarters combat, being shown several times throughout his life to be skilled enough to use the weapon against opponents wielding more traditional weaponry. Meanwhile, by the time of Arno's tenure as an assassin, using the hidden blades in direct combat had seemingly become obsolete, as Arno himself only ever used the blade for stealth purposes. And while yes, Arno did easily counter Belec's use of the weapon, I don't believe for a second that Belec was as skilled as the hidden blades as Ezio was. So while I do think Arno would recognize and be prepared against the weapon itself, I don't think he prepared against someone of Ezio's skill level with the weapon. And in the unlikely scenario that this fight came down to the use of hidden blades alone, Ezio would easily take down the younger assassin. Also, Ezio does have more experience, being an assassin for over 20 years by the events of Brotherhood, while by the end of Unity, Arno had only been an assassin for around 5 years. However, it should be noted that Arno has been shown that he can overcome those with more experience than himself. Like the majority of assassins tactically, these two are nearly identical, both being assassins first and fighters second, preferring a stealthy approach, silently getting close to an opponent before taking them down and escaping before they're overwhelmed by a number of guards, with their goals in combat being to end an engagement as quickly as possible using whatever means at their disposal. And so, I grant Arno the edge in combat skills and tactics, as well as declare him the victor of this match. Let's set up this fight. Let's say that the same Abstergo employees who set up the simulation between Edward Kenway and Shay Cormac from that fight have turned their little time killer into a sort of underground fight club for the other employees to enjoy, and that they decide to throw the assassins Arno and Ezio against one another simply for fun. As the simulation loads in, Ezio walks through the empty streets of 18th century London, seemingly unbothered by the unfamiliar surroundings and technology, when suddenly Arno also loads in and the two approach each other, both drawing their blades. The pair start off, sizing up their opponents with a probing offense, both recognizing the other as a fellow assassin, and both acting more hesitantly as a result. Arno is the first one to ramp up the pressure, flicking his blade, nearly cutting into Ezio's shoulder, but the older assassin catches the blade of Eden in the swordbind, trying to push the blade up and out of the way to take down Arno quickly. However, Arno immediately recognizes what Ezio is doing and grabs his handgun, shoving it into Ezio's face, with the older assassin just getting out of the way as Ezio fires, with the shot disorienting him, giving Arno enough time to kick him to the ground. Taking the opportunity, Arno drives his sword down, but Ezio is able to roll out of the way, landing a cut across Arno's chest. The pair break away, still very cautious of one another, and once again, Arno is the one to end up breaking the small standoff, thrusting his blade forward with Ezio easily parrying the blow. But Arno keeps his fellow assassin busy, keeping just enough pressure to keep Ezio on the defensive without overextending and giving him an opening. And then, once it seems like Ezio is growing comfortable with Arno's offense, he switches it up, suddenly gripping the blade with both hands and swinging down hard, opening Ezio's guard just enough for Arno to land a small cut across his leg, dropping him to his knee. Ezio, knowing he needs to switch things up, throws a small knife at Arno, who just manages to move out of the way, but is then cut across the gut as Ezio pulls out the notched cicada, almost immediately trying to bring it down on his opponent's chest. But Arno is able to catch it. However, now in close range, isn't prepared when Ezio suddenly stabs Arno's wrist with his hidden blade, causing him to drop the blade of Eden and allowing the dagger to dig a few inches into his chest. In response, Arno uses his own phantom blade, shooting Ezio point blank in the shoulder. Both men break away, tending to their respective wounds, and both quickly recovering. Arno, seeing the blade of Eden in between them, instead of making a grab at the sword, decides to pull out his halberd. And Ezio, seeing that his dagger obviously won't be of any help to him here, sheathes it along with the sword and goes for a spadone. The two re-engage, but Ezio, now knowing he needs to act more aggressively, tries to pressure Arno, but is finding it difficult with Arno's weapon keeping him at bay, on top of switching up their roles, now swatting away even harder strikes sent by the older assassin, and is taking small jabs and strikes whenever available, while keeping his distance. But unwilling to wait for Ezio to ramp up the pressure on him, Arno takes a strong swing that Ezio immediately sees through, and uses his spadone to push Arno to the side and raises his blade overhead, giving Arno just enough time to put up his pole to defend himself. But in doing so, the halberd is snapped in two, and Arno is immediately left open, giving Ezio a split second open, and he attempts to cut Arno down then and there. But the younger assassin rolls out of the way just in time, and in fact spins around fast enough to shoot Ezio in the back. As Ezio nearly falls, Arno makes a break for his sword, wanting to save his guillotine gun until it's absolutely necessary. Ezio, watching and knowing that in his current condition he won't be able to keep up using his spadone, drops it, once again wielding Altair's blade. The two waste no time and immediately re-engage with their blades. This time, neither man willing to play defense, and due to the injuries they both sustained over the fight, neither is really willing to push the other, eventually ending up in a blade lock. Now with their blades in a bind, Ezio suddenly thrusts his hand forward to stab Arno in the throat with his hidden blade. However, the instant his hand leaves the blade, Arno is able to force the sword down and ducks under the killing blow from Ezio, and thrusts his own blade up into the older assassin's chest. Ezio immediately begins going into shock and, in his final moments, is unable to do anything but look at the blade embedded in his chest until Arno pulls the blade out, letting Ezio hit the ground where he succumbs to his injuries. And with that, I declare Arno Dorian, the French assassin, the winner. Alright, I'm fully expecting to get some backlash over this one, and honestly, I get it. Ezio is easily my favorite between the two, but honestly, I just can't see him winning this. Arno's firearms alone give him a huge advantage over Ezio, whose armor isn't designed to resist against firearms, not to mention a wider variety of close quarters weapons in general. Then there's his fighting style, which, thanks to his training, experience, nearly 300 years of combative innovation, and even the era he grew up in would give him an advantage, along with generally just being more practical than Ezio's too defensive style of combat, which leads me to believe that Ezio is just less prepared to fight someone like Arno than Arno is to fight Ezio. Now, you could say that I nerfed Ezio by not granting him the armor of Altair and the Apple of Eden, and to that I say that if you give Ezio those items despite not having him by the end of Brotherhood, then it's only fair that it would only be fair to give Arno a powered Sword of Eden, which would still give Arno the win, as A, it would allow him to resist the Apple's mind control abilities, and B, would easily pierce the armor of Altair, as it was only a 13th century recreation of the first civilization's gear, while the sword is a genuine artifact. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? Do you agree that Arno has everything he needs to take the legendary assassin down, or do you think that Ezio could somehow work his way through Arno's abilities and end him? Let me know in the comments down below. If I got anything wrong, please feel free to correct me. Right, please rate, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, as I have plenty more like it. I also have a Twitter and Discord where you can talk to me directly, as well as links to the channels Winter Ghost and 3 Tactics Gamer, all in the description. Right, with all that, I'm Ray932, and I'll see you next time.
Yo. I had the usual for lunch. Ramen tastes a lot better when you're cutting class. Make sure you invite me next time. Say something, will ya? Why are you always like that? You're so stubborn. Put yourself in my shoes for a change. You think it's the other way around, huh? I guess you're right. I was too obsessed with power. Ever since I lost Miki, that's all I've cared about. I thought that if I was strong enough, I could protect anyone. But I was wrong. And now you're gone too. I'm such an idiot. In battle, there's always a chance of dying. I knew that. But I was so focused on fighting that I didn't notice anything else. It didn't matter how tough I was. Look what happened! Yeah, I know. Crying won't change anything, will it? Alright, Shinji. You watch from there with Miki. I still have things to do, right?
You'll learn 3 million yen in no time. Although your life and everything along with it will be a complete wreck by then.
I've been listening to you go on and on. Shut your damn mouth, you money-grubbing asshole!
Huh?
Have you decided to tread the path of strife?
Yes. Come to me!
Very well. Let us proceed with our contract at once. I am thou. Thou art I. You have finally found your own justice. Please, never lose sight of it again. This memorable day marks your graduation from your false self.
What the hell? A persona?
No, dude. That's a bike!
I can feel it. Myself. Me! Got it! Wow! Nice! What is that? I've never seen anything like it.
You better earn your keep, or else I'll kill you!
I will not lose heart again. Ever. I'll go full speed, non-stop. Right, Johanna?
I'll never